They say it all started with a message. Not just any message, but the kind that changed everything. The Galactic Empire, a giant ancient power that ruled thousands of worlds, sent a broadcast to a small blue planet on the edge of nowhere. That planet was Earth. The message was simple, almost cold. It said, "To the human species of Sol system, your ships have entered restricted space. You will surrender your fleets and submit to Imperial regulation. Failure to comply will result in neutralization." To them, it was routine. To us, it was comedy. For centuries, the Empire had done this again and again, finding new species, demanding surrender, taking their technology, their planets, their freedom. No one had ever said no, until that day. The humans of the 25th century were not the humans of old Earth history. We had left behind wars among ourselves, hunger and borders. But we had not left behind something important: our attitude, our humor, our pride. When that message reached the Terran Fleet Command, the officers didn't panic. They didn't call for emergency protocols. They just looked at each other and laughed. One officer reportedly said, "They're demanding what now?" "Oh, that's adorable." And everyone laughed harder. It wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper. That classic human disbelief that anyone could still think we'd kneel to a bully. We had built ships that could travel between stars. We had fought our way through black holes, solar storms, and the loneliness of deep space. We weren't going to surrender to an empire that didn't even know what Earth humor meant. Of course, the empire didn't see it that way. To them, we were just another young race, something to be managed or conquered. Their ambassadors called us primitive bipeds with emotional instability. Their analysts said our technology was average at best. Their leaders didn't even bother to meet us, and they just issued the same demand. Again, the message came twice more, each time more formal, each time more threatening, and each time, humans laughed. Across the colonies, from Mars to Titan, from the Luna bases to the far stations near Proxima, the transmission became a meme. People started adding subtitles, jokes, and songs to it. It played in bars, schools, and even military bases. For a while, the phrase "submit to Imperial regulation" was a trending punchline. But behind the humor, humanity was watching closely. Our leaders were not foolish. They knew that when an empire that big sends a message like that, they mean it. And when they say neutralization, it doesn't mean negotiation. So while the people laughed, the fleets prepared. The Terran Navy began quiet drills. Patrol routes were adjusted. Defensive grids came online. New experimental ships, once kept secret, were quietly moved into position. No one talked about it publicly, but everyone knew something was coming. And they were right. 2 months after the first broadcast, long-range sensors picked up something massive approaching the edge of human space: 50 Imperial cruisers, and one flagship the size of a small moon. To the Empire, this was called a First Contact Enforcement Fleet. They used it to make species surrender fast, before they even thought about fighting back. To the humans watching from the observatories on Neptune and Mars, it looked like a storm made of metal and fire. When the Empire's ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, they surrounded the nearest human outpost, a mining station orbiting Kepler 186f. The Empire's admiral broadcast one final message. His tone was calm but full of arrogance. "This is your last opportunity," he said. "You will surrender your weapons and your vessels. Refusal will result in complete orbital cleansing." There was silence for a few seconds. Then the Terran fleet commander replied. His voice was casual, almost amused. "Understood," he said. "You do what you have to. We'll do what we have to." Then the transmission ended. No threats, no drama. Just calm, human confidence. What happened next would be remembered for centuries as the day the galaxy realized humans were not to be underestimated. The Empire moved first. Their cruisers opened fire, beams of energy slicing through the void, bright and blinding. The mining station took the first hits, its shields flashing white. But the human ships didn't retreat. They didn't even flinch. They charged. Small compared to the Imperial giants, the Terran ships looked fragile. But as soon as they moved, everyone watching knew something was wrong. For the Empire, the human ships didn't follow any standard formation. They weaved through enemy fire like dancers, slipping between blasts, returning shots with precision so sharp it looked impossible. The Empire's commanders couldn't understand it. Their computers couldn't predict the human moves. Their strategies, built over centuries, suddenly meant nothing. The Terran ships fired railguns, weapons that used magnetism to launch tungsten slugs at near light speed. To the Empire, these were ancient weapons, outdated, primitive. But they forgot one thing. Physics doesn't go out of style. The slugs tore through Imperial shields like paper, smashing hulls, punching through armor, splitting ships apart. In minutes, the proud First Contact fleet lost a quarter of its ships, and through all of it, human voices filled the radio waves. Calm, joking, laughing. Someone reportedly said, "Is that all you've got?" Another added, "Careful, they might trip over their own egos next." Even in the middle of battle, humans couldn't stop making jokes. It wasn't disrespect. It was our way of handling fear, turning it into laughter. By the time the Empire realized the danger, it was too late. Their flagship tried to retreat, engines glowing, but a Terran destroyer jumped right in front of it and dropped a full-gravity mine. The explosion didn't destroy the ship, it humiliated it. The mighty Imperial vessel, symbol of fear across the stars, was forced to retreat. Limping, smoking, defeated. Half of their fleet didn't make it back. Across the galaxy, rumors spread like wildfire. The Empire tried to cover it up, calling it a pirate ambush, but the truth was already out. Traders, miners, and communication satellites had recorded everything. Every explosion, every human joke, every second of the battle. And those recordings started spreading. Everywhere, within weeks. Alien worlds far beyond human space began whispering a new phrase. The laughing primates. The Empire tried to silence it. They shut down networks, censored reports, even arrested some of their own officers. But the story couldn't be buried, because for the first time in thousands of years, someone had said no to them, and that someone had won. Back on Earth, people gathered in public squares watching the replay of the battle like a sports match. There were cheers, laughter, and even tears. Not because of the destruction, but because, for once, humanity had stood tall in a universe that had always looked down on them. It wasn't just victory. It was a statement. That day, the stars heard something new. Not fear, not surrender, but laughter. Loud, proud human laughter echoing across the void. And that sound was only the beginning. The Empire didn't believe it at first. There was no way, they said, that a small species from an unimportant blue planet had beaten one of their fleets. For thousands of years, the Galactic Empire had ruled everything beyond the core worlds. They had crushed rebellions, erased entire civilizations, and rewritten history so often that truth had become whatever they wanted it to be. They were sure that if they said, "We won," everyone would believe it. And for a short while it worked. The Imperial news networks released their version of events. They claimed that their fleet had successfully eliminated pirate resistance in the Sol border sectors. They even broadcast fake footage, explosions in empty space, edited to look like a victory. To most of the galaxy, it was just another minor report. No one cared about some unknown species on the edge of the map, but not everyone believed the story. Something about the report didn't add up. Merchants and traders, who moved between the outer sectors, began whispering about strange ships and laughing soldiers. They had seen the real recordings, leaked fragments of the battle, spread across private networks and black markets. The videos were shaky but clear enough. You could see small, fast ships darting around massive cruisers, firing bright streaks of light and railgun bursts. And you could hear the voices, human voices, laughing, joking, mocking the Empire in the middle of combat. The most famous clip showed a Terran pilot saying, "Try aiming next time," before firing a shot that split an Imperial cruiser in two. That clip spread faster than light. Soon it wasn't just traders talking. Miners, explorers, and even Imperial citizens began searching for the laughing humans. Some started wearing old Earth-style helmets as a joke. Others played recordings of human laughter on loop in spaceports. It became a symbol, not of fear but of something forgotten. Courage. Meanwhile, in the Imperial capital, the High Council was in chaos. The Emperor himself demanded answers. He couldn't understand how a new species had destroyed one of his best fleets. He accused his admirals of lying, his scientists of incompetence, his intelligence officers of failure. Inside their shining halls, covered in banners of victory and order, panic spread like a virus. The surviving officers from the failed mission were brought back for questioning. Some tried to lie, but others spoke the truth. They said the humans fought like no one they had ever seen. They said the humans didn't follow logic or fear. They said the humans laughed while fighting as if war was just another adventure. The council dismissed it as nonsense. Laughing in battle? Impossible, they said. Clearly the officers have gone mad from defeat. But the recordings didn't lie. When they finally analyzed the recovered data from the wrecked ships, they found strange energy signatures, irregular maneuvers, and unpredictable patterns. The Imperial strategists were furious. Humans had broken every rule of combat they had studied for centuries. They didn't follow formation logic. They didn't use pre-approved battle algorithms. They just adapted. And that was what scared the Empire most. For all their size and power, the Empire had lost something long ago. Creativity. They followed orders, rules, systems. Every move was calculated, every decision approved. They had forgotten how to improvise. Humans hadn't. While the Empire argued among themselves, humanity went quiet, but not idle. The Terran fleet didn't broadcast victory speeches or show off trophies. They simply strengthened their defenses and sent quiet warnings to their colonies. They knew the Empire wouldn't forget this. They knew round 2 was coming. But while they prepared for war, something else started happening across the galaxy. Stories. The story of the battle spread far and wide, changing with every retelling. In one version, a single human ship defeated an entire fleet. In another, a human commander outsmarted the Empire using chaotic battle music. The facts didn't matter anymore. The legend had begun. Even in the Empire's own territories, workers and soldiers whispered the name Terran. To them, it meant hope. If a small world could stand against the Empire and survive, maybe others could too. The Empire noticed this growing spark of rebellion. They tried to crush it fast. New laws were passed, banning the discussion of unauthorized species and false victories. Anyone caught spreading the story of the humans could face punishment. But you can't silence laughter. The harder they tried to hide the truth, the more it spread. People laughed in secret, sharing jokes about those crazy humans. And that laughter started to scare the Empire more than any weapon. Inside the Empire's military command, they began planning revenge. Admirals debated whether to send another fleet, this time larger, something that could restore order and respect. One general said, "We will show them that the Empire does not lose." But even as they prepared, something felt different. It wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize your enemy might not be weaker than you thought. On the human side, life carried on, though everyone knew what was coming. People still went to work, still raised families, still shared jokes about the Empire. But deep down, everyone felt it. The calm before another storm. Across the colonies, defense networks were updated. The Terran Council quietly met with allied species who had also suffered under the Empire's rule. They didn't ask for help, they offered it. "Stand with us," they said, "and we'll stand with you." Many were afraid, but a few brave ones agreed. It was small at first, a handful of freighters and scout ships joining human fleets. But it was the beginning of something bigger. The Empire, of course, ignored the warning signs. They believed in their old rule. No one defies the Empire twice. And so they made the same mistake again. Months after the first battle, Imperial communication channels went silent. Then suddenly thousands of ships began moving toward the human border. It was an invasion force, in a far larger than before. 5,000 ships led by the Grand Armada. This was no first contact fleet. This was vengeance. But even before the first gun was fired, humanity was ready. They had seen it coming. They had studied every Imperial tactic, every formation, every pattern of attack. They didn't plan to defend. They planned to surprise. As the Armada approached, human signals filled the air again. Not warnings, not surrender, but messages of calm humor. "Welcome back," one human operator said over open channels. "Hope you brought more ships this time." Even the Empire's translators were confused. They couldn't tell if humans were mocking them or just being human. Across human space, everyone was on edge, but no one was afraid. Because after that first victory, people believed. They believed in their fleets, in their unity, in their spirit. In schools and public halls, people gathered to watch live updates. Children asked, "Will the Empire come here?" And adults smiled, saying, "Let them try." Back on the imperial capital, the emperor made one final announcement to his people. He declared that the empire would erase the Terran mistake forever. But those words, broadcast across the galaxy, only made things worse. For many, they sounded desperate, like the angry words of someone who knew they were losing control. As the Grand Armada crossed into human space, millions of eyes across the galaxy watched. They wanted to see what these humans would do next. Would they surrender this time? Would they hide? Or would they laugh again? And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, on the bridge of a Terran flagship, a quiet voice said what everyone on Earth was thinking. They came to make demands again. Then a small pause, and the voice added softly but with a grin. All right then. Let's make history repeat itself. The laughter returned. The signal went live, and every world that once whispered about the humans fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. The stage was set. The Empire was coming, and humanity was ready to show them, again, why laughter could be the most dangerous sound in the galaxy. The second great battle began without warning. No one in the galaxy expected the Empire to strike so fast, and yet somehow, everyone was waiting for it. Every station, every colony, every listening post held its breath when the sensors picked up the Grand Armada entering human space. 5,000 ships. The largest force the Empire had ever sent against a single species. Each one carried the pride of a civilization that believed it could never lose. They came with the same arrogance as before, broadcasting the same message: surrender or be destroyed. But this time humanity didn't even bother to reply. They had already learned everything they needed to know about the Empire, its ships, its tactics, and its ego. The humans had spent months preparing, not with bigger weapons or stronger shields, but with smarter ideas. They didn't plan to fight the Empire head-on. They planned to outthink them. The Empire's ships entered the Epsilon Verge, a quiet region of space filled with asteroid fields, magnetic storms, and hidden gravity wells. To most commanders, it was the worst place to fight. To humans, it was perfect. The first contact came when an Imperial scout ship disappeared. No explosion, no signal, it just vanished. Minutes later, another one was gone. Then another. The Imperial Admiral ordered a full scan. Nothing. Space looked empty, but the humans were there watching, waiting. When the first human strike came, it wasn't with lasers or torpedoes. It came with silence. The Empire's communication systems began to glitch. Their navigation data scrambled. Their targeting computers showed false readings. Some ships saw phantom enemies that weren't there. Others couldn't see the real ones at all. Then, out of the darkness, human ships appeared. Small, fast, unpredictable, like flashes of light dancing through the void. They didn't follow any formation. They didn't even stay in one place long enough to be targeted. They used the gravity fields to slingshot through space, vanishing and reappearing in ways Imperial physics couldn't explain. Every shot they fired hit something important: engines, shields, weapon cores. They didn't waste energy trying to destroy everything. They fought with precision, not power. The Empire's fleet began to break apart, trying to regroup. But by the time they formed a defensive wall, the humans were already behind them. It was chaos, a beautiful, terrifying chaos, and once again, the laughter returned. Imperial officers could hear it over the open channels. Voices calm and playful in the middle of war. "Adjust 2 degrees, they're missing again," one said. Another replied, "I told you they'd try the same move twice." The Empire didn't understand. To them, war was supposed to be discipline, order, silence. But to humans, war was survival, and survival meant creativity. When the first Imperial dreadnought exploded, it shook the whole battlefield. It was the Empire's pride, the symbol of power they believed could never fall. Watching it burn was like watching a god bleed. For a moment, everything went still. Then human ships pushed forward. They used the wreckage of the dreadnought as cover, firing railguns and missiles through the debris. The Empire's own broken ships became the humans' shields. Hours passed. The Grand Armada was supposed to wipe humanity out in minutes, but it couldn't even find them. Every time the Empire thought it had the humans cornered, they slipped away. Every time they tried to retreat, humans were waiting on the other side. When the last Imperial commander finally gave the order to fall back, the fleet was already collapsing. Out of 5,000 ships, more than half were gone. The rest fled in panic, The humans didn't chase them. They didn't need to. They just sent one transmission to the entire galaxy. A simple message. Next time, bring more ships. And with that, the battle was over. The news spread faster than light. Even though the Empire tried to block every communication channel, the recording still escaped. Through smugglers, traitors, and rebel networks. Every corner of the galaxy heard it. Everyone saw what had happened. The mighty Empire, the one that had ruled for thousands of years, had been beaten again. By humans. At first, the Empire denied everything. Their public broadcasts called it a minor loss. They said the Terran fleets used illegal technology, or that cosmic interference had disrupted their systems. They even tried to blame each other, admirals blaming scientists, scientists blaming engineers. But the truth was too big to hide. Soon, even Imperial citizens started to ask questions. If humans could defeat two fleets, maybe the Empire wasn't as unstoppable as it claimed. If these so-called primitive bipeds could outsmart them, what else had the Empire lied about? That's when the cracks began to show. Small rebellions that had been silent for decades suddenly started speaking up. Workers in mining colonies refused to send materials to Imperial shipyards. Local governors began to delay orders, pretending their communications were jammed. Even some soldiers started to wonder what they were really fighting for. The Empire responded the only way it knew how, with fear. They tightened control, increased surveillance, and banned all mentions of humans. But it didn't work. The more they tried to silence people, the louder the whispers grew. In dark bars and hidden stations, people played the recordings of the human laughter during battle. Some called it the sound of freedom. Others said it was the sound of madness. But whatever it was, it gave them courage. On Earth, people were just as surprised by the effect. They had fought to defend themselves, not to start a revolution. But now, across the galaxy, their fight was becoming something more. A spark. A reminder that no empire lasts forever. The Terran Council met in secret to discuss what would come next. They knew the Empire wouldn't stop. They would rebuild, reorganize, and come again, stronger, angrier, more desperate. But humanity had no intention of conquering anyone. They just wanted to live free. Still, as the months passed, more and more alien envoys began reaching out to them. Species that had once feared to even mention the Empire's name now sent secret messages. Some offered resources, others offered intelligence. All of them wanted one thing: hope. They wanted to join the humans. At first, the Terrans were cautious. They didn't trust easily. But they also knew this was something bigger than themselves now. It wasn't just about defending Earth. It was about changing the galaxy. The Empire, meanwhile, was falling into denial. They couldn't accept that their rule was slipping. Their historians tried to rewrite recent events, calling the Terran battles glorified skirmishes. Their scientists tried to explain the defeats by calling human behavior irrational warfare. And their leaders, sitting in their golden halls, convinced themselves that everything was still under control. But deep down, they knew the truth. For the first time in their long history, they were afraid. The galaxy was no longer laughing at the humans. It was laughing with them. And the more people heard about humanity's defiance, the jokes, the courage, the refusal to bow, the more they began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the Empire's age was coming to an end. One Imperial scholar who secretly admired humanity wrote in his private journal, "They laugh at fear because they've lived with it all their lives. They smile when others would run. That is why we cannot defeat them. You can't break a species that turns fear into laughter." Those words were never meant to leave the Empire's archives, but somehow they did. And when they reached human space, they became famous. Printed on posters, quoted in broadcasts, and whispered across colonies, they reminded everyone why humans fought the way they did. Not for power. Not for conquest, but because they simply refused to kneel. As the Empire grew more desperate, its grip began to slip. Trade routes broke down, allies turned silent. Whole worlds started flying the Terran flag in secret, hiding it from Imperial patrols. The galaxy had changed, and there was no going back. By the end of that year, the Empire's leaders called for an emergency council. They spoke for hours, trying to plan a new strategy against the humans. But nothing they said mattered anymore. Their enemies were no longer just human fleets. Their enemy was an idea. The idea that laughter, that simple human defiance, could break chains that had lasted for millennia. And somewhere on the edge of human space, as the stars shimmered over a small Terran outpost, a pilot looked up at the night sky and smiled. "They wanted us to be afraid," he said softly. "Instead, we made them remember what fear feels like." That moment, that quiet reflection, carried through every corner of human space. And though the next battles were still to come, humanity already knew the truth. The Empire might have the numbers, but humans had something stronger. A spirit that refused to die. And a laughter that would echo across the stars forever. For months after the Empire's second defeat, the galaxy was silent. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Everyone knew the Empire wouldn't stop. They never had. For thousands of years, whenever someone challenged them, they always came back harder, stronger and angrier. But this time, something had changed. Across the stars, old colonies that once trembled under imperial rule were now whispering the same name: humans. The small, stubborn, laughing species from the edge of the galaxy had done what no one else had ever dared. They had fought the Empire and won. It wasn't just a military victory. It was psychological. It had cracked the illusion of the Empire's power. And that kind of crack spreads fast. Inside the Empire's highest chambers, there was panic disguised as pride. They couldn't afford to look weak. So, they decided to end the human problem once and for all. They built an armada larger than anything ever seen before. Over 10,000 ships gathered from every corner of the Empire. Dreadnoughts, carriers, cruisers, all armed to the teeth. The Emperor called it Operation Final Dawn. The plan was simple: destroy everything related to humanity. Not conquer, not negotiate, erase. But what they didn't realize was that humanity was no longer alone. In the months after the last battle, several alien civilizations had quietly reached out to the Terran Council. They were small groups at first, smugglers, miners, even a few rebel commanders. But they brought something the humans valued more than weapons: information. They knew how the Empire worked. They knew their weaknesses, their blind spots, their overconfidence. Together they formed something new, the Accord. A secret alliance made not of power but of purpose. No titles, no empires, no thrones. Just free beings standing together. The humans didn't promise them riches or control. They simply said, "We'll fight beside you, not above you," and that was enough. So, when the Empire's massive armada began its slow march toward human space, the Accord was already waiting. The chosen battlefield was the Epsilon Verge, a strange region of space filled with fractured asteroids, dense gas clouds, and unstable gravity wells, a place where normal ships could barely navigate. To the Empire, it looked like a trap. To humanity, it was home field advantage. As the Imperial fleet entered the Verge, scanners picked up strange signals: reflections, false readings, and phantom ships. They thought it was interference. It wasn't. It was the humans playing with their sensors. Thousands of Terran ships were hidden within the asteroids, powered down and silent, their hulls coated with stealth materials that bent light and heat. For hours, the Empire searched, trying to locate them. Then, without warning, the human flagship sent a single transmission. It was broadcast on every open frequency. A calm voice said only 3 words: "Ready when you are." And then space exploded into chaos. From every direction, human and allied ships burst out of the asteroid fields. They attacked in waves, moving faster than the Empire's sensors could track. Small ships darted between cruisers, dropping mines and firing bursts of plasma that overloaded shields. Larger ships stayed hidden, using gravity wells to slingshot kinetic rounds that hit like meteors. The Empire tried to form their standard battle lines, but it was useless. The field was too dense, too unpredictable, and the humans knew how to use it. Their ships weaved through debris like it was a dance. Every movement was calculated, every hit deliberate. The humans weren't just fighting, they were performing. Allied ships followed their lead. The rebels, once used to running, now stood their ground. Their captains shouted across channels, copying human tactics, laughing even as they fought. For the first time in their lives, they weren't afraid. The Empire didn't understand it. They had the numbers, the weapons, the experience. But they couldn't keep up with something that didn't follow rules. Their commanders yelled for order, for structure. But the battle had no structure left. It was chaos, and humans thrived in chaos. At one point, an Imperial battleship fired a full broadside at a cluster of smaller Terran ships. The humans didn't retreat. Instead, they used the shockwaves from the blast to launch themselves faster, closing the distance before the Empire could reload. They hit back with everything. Railguns, torpedoes, even their ship's debris turned into projectiles. One Imperial officer reportedly said before their ship went dark, "They don't fight to win. They fight to make sure we remember them." Hours turned into days. The battle raged non-stop. The Epsilon Verge became a storm of light and fire, a graveyard of ships and shattered metal. But through it all, one thing kept echoing across the communication lines: laughter. Even when ships were damaged, even when the odds seemed impossible, human voices came through the static, joking, mocking, inspiring. It wasn't arrogance. It was defiance. Pure human defiance. At the height of the battle, when it seemed like neither side could gain ground, the humans unleashed their final move. Deep inside the asteroid belt, hidden for weeks, were 12 massive carriers, each carrying swarms of autonomous drones powered by adaptive learning AI. When they activated, space filled with millions of small blinking lights, they weren't ordinary machines. They could change tactics in seconds, learning from every movement the Empire made. The Empire's ships tried to shoot them down, but the drones moved too fast, forming living walls of defense around human fleets, repairing damaged ships mid-battle, and overwhelming the enemy in every direction. In less than 6 hours, the Empire's command fleet was surrounded. Their flagship, a golden dreadnought the size of a city, stood in the center, its hull scarred and burning. Still, the Emperor's voice came through the speakers, full of pride and rage. "You think this changes anything? You think laughter can defeat an empire?" And from the human flagship the reply came, calm and clear: "No, but it's a good start." Then the humans transmitted one last signal, a pulse that triggered the gravity fields they had secretly manipulated across the verge. The entire region began to shift. Asteroids moved like living things drawn toward the Imperial fleet. Trapped between collapsing gravity wells and human fire, the Empire's armada fell apart. When the dust finally cleared, the once mighty fleet of 10,000 was reduced to a few hundred broken ships fleeing into deep space. The Empire's defeat was absolute, not just in numbers but in spirit. For the first time in history, their leaders had to admit what they had denied for so long. The humans were not a mistake. They were a turning point. Word of the victory spread like wildfire. Planets under Imperial rule began rising up. Workers refused to follow orders. Soldiers defected. Governors declared independence. The Empire tried to hide what happened at Epsilon Verge, but the truth couldn't be silenced anymore. Every corner of the galaxy now knew. The Empire had fallen to laughter, courage, and the will of a small species that refused to surrender. On Earth, there was no celebration. No grand speeches, just quiet pride. People gathered in streets watching the stars, knowing they had done something no one thought possible. They hadn't fought for power. They hadn't fought for revenge. They had fought for freedom, theirs and everyone else's. One old mechanic watching the final transmission from the battle summed it up best. He said, "They thought we were unpredictable. They were right. But what they'll never understand is, we didn't fight because we had to. We fought because someone had to." And so the war that began with an arrogant demand ended with something far greater: unity. The Empire's fall had begun. Not with hate, but with laughter. Not with conquest, but with courage. In the years that followed, people across the galaxy would remember that battle not as the fall of the Empire, but as the day the stars laughed. Because on that day, humanity didn't just defend their world. They gave the galaxy something it had forgotten: hope. After the Battle of Epsilon Verge, the galaxy changed forever. The great Imperial banners that once flew proudly over countless worlds began to fall one by one. For the first time in living memory, the Empire, the all-powerful, all-controlling machine, was afraid, not of fleets or weapons, but of an idea, the idea that freedom could not be crushed, that laughter could be stronger than fear, that even the smallest world could rise up and say no more. The human victory spread through the galaxy faster than light. Every news channel, every hidden network, Every smuggler's whisper carried the same message. The Empire can be defeated. On hundreds of planets, people who had been silent for generations began to speak. Workers refused to mine for Imperial warships. Farmers stopped sending food to Imperial bases. Students painted the symbol of humanity, a small blue circle, on walls, doors, and even on the sides of starships. It became a symbol of rebellion, of courage, of hope. And deep inside the Empire's core worlds, the cracks began to show. Commanders argued with admirals. Governors disobeyed orders. Supplies vanished. Ships disappeared. Entire outposts turned their backs. The machine that once ran perfectly now sputtered and broke apart. The Emperor, hidden in his grand palace, refused to believe it. He surrounded himself with loyal guards, pretending everything was still under control. But even he could feel it, the weight of a dying empire pressing down on him. Meanwhile, humanity did something no one expected. They didn't invade. They didn't demand tribute. They didn't declare themselves rulers of the galaxy. They simply helped rebuild. When news came that a planet had broken free from Imperial control, human ships arrived not with soldiers, but with engineers, medics, and teachers. They helped repair communication systems, water supplies, and power grids. They shared knowledge freely, and that shocked everyone even more than their victory. Other civilizations couldn't understand it. They asked, "Why help us? You could rule us if you wanted." And the humans always gave the same simple answer. Because someone helped us once. Now it's our turn. This quiet kindness spread faster than any army. Planets that had once been enemies now opened their ports to human ships. Merchants traded freely, scientists exchanged ideas, and for the first time, the galaxy began to feel connected, not by force, but by choice. But of course, peace never comes easily. The Empire still had powerful fleets hidden in deep space. Some admirals refused to surrender. They began attacking small colonies and trade routes, trying to remind everyone that the Empire still existed. But this time, the galaxy didn't run away. When an Imperial cruiser raided a mining station, half a dozen ships from different species appeared to defend it. Humans, reptilians, synthetics, and even former Imperial soldiers who had switched sides. They fought together, not as one army, but as a family. They didn't fight for orders. They fought for each other. And slowly, one by one, those hidden Imperial fleets vanished. Some surrendered, some escaped into the darkness, and some joined the very people they were sent to destroy. Within a year, the Empire's reach had shrunk to less than a dozen core worlds. Once proud cities now lay quiet, their grand statues covered in dust, their skies filled with the silence of defeat. But humans didn't celebrate. They knew what power could do. They knew how easily freedom could turn into control. So instead of building an empire of their own, they helped form something new, the Galactic Accord. It wasn't a government. It wasn't a kingdom. It was an agreement, a promise among free worlds to protect each other and share what they learned. Every planet, no matter how small, had a voice. Every species had a seat at the table. And at the center of it all, humanity didn't sit on a throne. They sat among everyone else, equal and open. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, mistakes, and moments of distrust. But there was also laughter, the same laughter that had once echoed through the battlefields of Epsilon Verge. That laughter became the heartbeat of the Accord. There was one story that spread across the galaxy, told in every tavern and classroom. It was about a human pilot who, during the Great War, had faced an Imperial dreadnought with nothing but a small scout ship. Instead of fighting, he sent a message across open channels saying, "You can surrender now or I can embarrass you in front of everyone." The Imperial commander, furious, fired everything he had and missed every shot. The pilot dodged through debris and space storms, joking the entire time, until the dreadnought's power core overheated and shut down. He never fired a single weapon. That story, true or not, became a legend. It captured what everyone had come to believe. Humans were unpredictable, bold, and strangely kind. They didn't win through strength alone, but through heart. In the shadows, however, the last remnants of the Empire were not done. A few high-ranking officials fled to the outer rims of the galaxy, taking whatever they could: ships, resources, secrets. They began whispering of a return, of revenge. But for now, they were ghosts. Back on Earth, life slowly returned to normal. The skies that had once carried fear now carried light. Children played under new stars, knowing they were part of something far bigger than their small blue world. The Terran Council turned their focus inward, rebuilding cities, healing lands, and guiding humanity into a new age. But they never forgot what they had learned. They built museums filled with the stories of every species that had stood with them, not as trophies but as memories of unity. One day, a journalist asked a veteran of the Epsilon Verge War how it felt to defeat the Empire. The old man smiled softly and said, "We didn't defeat them. We just reminded the galaxy what it means to be alive." Those words became part of the Accord's founding charter. Years passed, and new generations grew up hearing about the war like an old tale, something that felt almost unreal. They studied how humans had fought, but more importantly, how they had rebuilt. They learned that strength wasn't about control, but compassion. And then came something unexpected. From deep space, beyond known systems, strange signals began to appear. Rhythmic, organized, but unlike any known language. Scientists across the Accord worked to decode them. It wasn't imperial, it was older, far older. Some said it was the echo of a lost civilization. Others believed it was a new species reaching out. But the humans, they just smiled, because they knew what came next. Exploration, curiosity, adventure. The same things that had always defined them. So, when the first new exploration fleet launched, it wasn't led by generals or admirals. It was led by explorers, engineers, and dreamers. They didn't carry weapons. They carried instruments, sensors, and hope. As they left the orbit of Earth, millions watched from every world of the Accord. Children waved from the streets, people cheered, and across the stars, messages of support poured in. One small boy on a distant planet looked up and said, "Do you think they'll find new friends out there?" And his mother smiled. "If they do, I hope they laugh first." That single sentence spread across networks faster than any broadcast. Because it captured exactly what humanity had given to the galaxy. Not fear, not power, but laughter. The kind of laughter that breaks chains. The kind that turns enemies into allies. The kind that says we survived and will keep going. And so, as the first fleet disappeared into the dark, the galaxy once again found itself quiet. But this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace. The kind of peace that hums softly like a heartbeat, full of promise, full of life. The Empire was gone, but its lessons remained. The Accord stood strong, not because of rules or armies, but because of trust. And in the heart of it all, the humans kept doing what they did best, exploring, helping, and laughing, because that's who they were. Not conquerors, not rulers, just humans, small, unpredictable, stubborn, and somehow always smiling, even when facing the impossible. And across the stars, as ships carried their blue symbol to new worlds, people whispered the same phrase that had once echoed during the darkest of wars. When the galaxy issued demands, humanity laughed. Many years passed after the fall of the Galactic Empire. The stars that once burned with the fires of war now glowed with the light of peace. Planets rebuilt. Trade routes reopened. Children who had grown up under the shadow of fear now lived in a galaxy that finally felt alive. The Galactic Accord continued to grow. New species joined every year, bringing their stories, their dreams, and their hopes. The meetings were sometimes messy. Different languages, different customs, endless debates. But no one complained. Because it was better to argue in peace than to fight in silence. At the heart of it all, humans kept doing what they always did best, exploring. They didn't stop after victory. They didn't rest on old glory. They kept moving forward, curious and restless, always wondering what lay beyond the next star. Their exploration ships became a familiar sight across the galaxy. Wherever they arrived, people smiled. They knew these visitors wouldn't demand anything. They'd just ask questions, share food, trade stories, and sometimes teach a few games that made everyone laugh. The galaxy began to heal. Old wounds faded and old fears turned into memories. But even peace has its challenges. The younger generations, those who hadn't seen the war and began asking questions. They wanted to know what made their parents and grandparents so brave. They asked, why did the humans fight? Why didn't they give up? And every elder had their own version of the story. Some said it was because humans didn't know how to quit. Others said it was because they cared too much to walk away. But one common answer always came through, because they believed laughter was stronger than fear. That belief became a tradition. Every year, across the Accord, worlds celebrated a festival called the Day of Laughter. It wasn't about the war. It wasn't about heroes or battles. It was about remembering that hope could come from the strangest of places, even a smile in the middle of chaos. People told stories, sang songs, and lit lanterns that floated up into the night sky. And on that day, wherever you were, if you looked up, you could see thousands of tiny lights drifting together, a reminder that no matter how dark things became, light would always return. But while the galaxy celebrated, something new began to stir at the edge of known space. The mysterious signals humanity had detected years ago were getting stronger. At first, scientists thought it was just background radiation, or perhaps an echo from old communication relays. But as the patterns grew clearer, it became obvious why it wasn't random. It was intelligent. The signals repeated every few days, always changing slightly, as if testing different ways to communicate. It wasn't a language anyone recognized. It wasn't imperial. It wasn't from any known species. It was something completely new. Excitement filled the Accord. For centuries, they had dreamed of meeting new civilizations. Now that dream might finally come true. A new exploration fleet was assembled, not to conquer or defend, but to greet. It was led by humans, but included members of almost every species in the Accord. They called their mission the Reach Beyond. When the fleet launched, people from across the galaxy gathered to watch. Messages poured in from 1,000 worlds, words of encouragement, hope, and curiosity. For many, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. The journey took months. They crossed empty systems, dead worlds, and regions filled with strange radiation. And then one day they saw it. A star unlike any they had seen before. Orbiting that star was a single massive structure, a ring-like object that stretched for millions of kilometers. It shimmered with light, pulsing gently like it was alive. The signals were coming from there. The fleet approached carefully. Every sensor scanned, every system watched. And then, the structure responded. Lights shifted across its surface, forming patterns. And then, for the first time, a voice came through the communication channels. It wasn't clear or sharp. It sounded like wind mixed with music. No words, just emotion. The crew felt it. It wasn't threatening, it felt welcoming. Human linguists and alien scholars worked together for days, trying to decode it. Bit by bit, they realized the signal wasn't words, it was thoughts. The structure was a kind of living archive, left behind by a civilization so ancient that their worlds had turned to dust long ago. They had called themselves the Founders. They weren't gods or rulers, and just explorers, much like humans. And the message they left behind was simple. We built this so that someone someday would know we were here. If you are hearing this, then you are ready. The universe is vast. Keep searching, keep learning, and never let silence take your laughter. The message spread across the fleet and then across the galaxy. It felt like destiny, like the Founders had been waiting for someone like the humans to come along. When the message reached Earth, people wept. Not because it was sad, but because it felt like the universe itself had spoken back. For generations, humanity had wondered if they were alone. Now they had an answer. They weren't. But even more beautiful was the realization that the Founders had believed in the same thing humanity did, and that laughter and curiosity were the keys to survival. The discovery united the galaxy even more deeply. The Accord declared the Founders' message to be part of their universal law. It was written into the heart of every ship, every school, every new world that joined them. And so, a new era began. It wasn't an era of conquest or control. It was an era of understanding. The galaxies that had once been torn by war were now connected by exploration, friendship, and shared wonder. On the 100th anniversary of the Empire's fall, the Accord held a grand gathering, not on Earth, not on any capital world, but aboard a neutral space station built between the stars. Representatives from every known civilization attended. There were no weapons, no guards, no hierarchy. Just people, talking, laughing, remembering. During that gathering, an old human captain, one who had fought at Epsilon Verge many years ago, was asked to speak. He stood before billions watching across the galaxy, his voice calm and kind. He said, "When we first met the Empire, they gave us orders. They demanded our surrender. They told us we were too small, too weak, too foolish to survive in their galaxy. But we didn't listen. We laughed. And in that laughter we found our strength. He paused, smiling softly before continuing. We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we remembered who we were. Explorers, dreamers, people who looked at the stars not with fear but with curiosity. And today as I look at all of you, I see that same light in every species, every world. That's what it means to be alive in this galaxy, to laugh, to learn, to keep going. The hall was silent for a long moment, and then, one by one, people began to clap, cheer, and laugh. It spread like wildfire, from the station to every planet, every colony, every ship. The sound of laughter filled the stars once again. Later that night, as the old captain sat alone watching the stars through the observation deck, a young cadet approached him. "Sir?" the cadet asked softly. "Do you think the Empire will ever come back?" The captain smiled. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe something else will rise one day. That's how life works. But if they do, I hope they meet people who still remember how to laugh." The cadet nodded, and together they sat quietly, watching the endless sky, out there beyond the stars. The founder's message still echoed, soft and eternal. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that no empire lasts forever. But laughter can echo for eternity. And as the galaxies turned and the stars drifted slowly through the dark, the words that once defined humanity's courage lived on, whispered, sung, remembered, and passed down through generations. When the galaxy issued demands, we laughed.